Imagine the sound of a quill moving across paper, long before the world could understand what it was writing. In the dim solitude of a 15th century room, a man draws with surgical precision. But he isn't sketching machines. He's mapping destinies. His gaze fixed on something no one else can see. Not the future, but the echo of something the human soul has already forgotten. Leonardo da Vinci. A name we all know, yet a mystery still unresolved. But what if what we call genius is simply the visible trace of an invisible calling? What if his inventions, sketches, and writings weren't just the output of a brilliant mind, but of a restless soul? Carl Jung believed some images don't emerge from the individual, but from the collective unconscious, archetypal forces that manifest when the soul of the world needs to be heard. And Da Vinci might have been the most attuned instrument of that silent choir. He wasn't just an artist, he was a mirror. The collective unconscious of the Renaissance, a time suspended between light and shadow, when science and spirit wrestled in silence, needed a seer. And it found one in Leonardo, the quiet visionary who spoke in symbols. But no one wanted to listen. The archetype of the silent prophet lives on the margins. It doesn't seek applause. It watches the symbols of time the way one reads scars on a sacred body. Da Vinci wrote backward with a script that required a mirror, not just to evade censorship, but to shield the sacred from premature eyes. Or perhaps because he knew what he captured wasn't meant for his time. Maybe you've felt this before. That strange sense you carry a memory of an ending that hasn't happened yet. How do we explain anatomical sketches that seem to expose not just physical structure, but something spiritual? How do we interpret his flying machines as more than invention, as longing? And the most unsettling question of all, what if the end he foresaw wasn't about civilization at all, but about the dimming of human awareness? Leonardo didn't see the future as a straight line. He saw it as a reflection. And what he saw might have been less about the world collapsing and more about consciousness falling asleep. He wasn't warning of the end of the world. He was pointing to the end of being in the world. That's why his work endures, because it doesn't belong to time. Art for Da Vinci wasn't expression. It was invocation. Every stroke, a portal. Every sketch, a desperate attempt to remind us of what we were beginning to forget, that without soul, all progress becomes ruin. Here's where we return to Jung. To him, the archetype of the genius doesn't invent, it remembers. The true visionary doesn't predict, he translates. And maybe that's exactly what Da Vinci was doing. His journals were not technical notebooks, they were spiritual manuscripts. His diagrams were not blueprints for machines, but metaphors for altered states of consciousness. And his anatomical drawings weren't meant to explain the body, but to map the soul before it vanished from the world. Now picture a man alone in candlelight. He closes his eyes, and when he opens them again, he sees a city submerged, not by water, but by the world's forgetting. That man was Leonardo, and maybe he saw it all, not as punishment, as warning, as if to say, the end you fear is only the reflection of what you chose to forget. So when you look at his ancient drawings, don't see inventions, see mirrors. And when you read his notes, don't search for logic, listen for grief, because maybe the real alchemy hidden in those manuscripts is this: to reunite science and spirit, intellect and instinct, and reveal that the true collapse is not material, it's spiritual. What if those anatomical sketches were actually maps of collective psyche? What if Leonardo was trying to warn us that humanity's biggest mistake would be trying to fly with the wrong wings? This is not a history lesson, it's a signal. You're not watching content about the past. You're brushing up against an echo. That might be yours too. And what if the end Da Vinci foresaw wasn't the fall of civilization, but the falling asleep of consciousness? What would you do if you could remember? Imagine carrying a secret no one asked for. Imagine having visions that your own era isn't even equipped to translate. Leonardo da Vinci lived in a world fascinated by cathedrals and conquest, But what he saw didn't belong in public squares or royal courts. His mind was a sacred vault where symbols arranged themselves without permission. He saw beyond, and what he saw disturbed him. Maybe that's why he wrote in reverse. Not just to avoid scrutiny, but to hide from the present what only the future might be ready to understand. His words, his images, his inventions, they weren't for the eyes of his time. They were seeds planted for a world yet to bloom. But how? Do you live with visions no one can interpret? To carry the shadow of genius is to bear the ache of being out of place, in the most sacred sense. Da Vinci wasn't just ahead of his time. He was out of step with the entire framework of what time could grasp. His clarity isolated him. His sensitivity burned him from within. Carl Jung would have called this the visionary's shadow, the archetype of one who sees the truth, but is crushed by the inability to share it. Not from pride, but from depth. Leonardo saw what the world wasn't ready to witness, and it silenced him. His notebooks are filled with impossible machines, with designs centuries ahead. But buried between the marvels are anomalies, cracks, distortions. Some interpret these as technical missteps, but what if they're metaphors? What if, through flawed designs, Da Vinci was sketching something deeper? The vibrational misalignment of the collective? Maybe he knew, intuitively, that technology alone would never cure a spiritually starved world. That every machine, built without soul, was in truth a mirror of our disconnection. His anatomical studies weren't just about flesh and bone. They whispered of something more, the fragility of the sacred when trapped in the rational. There's one sketch where he draws a human skull like a hollow cathedral, hallways leading nowhere, empty chambers, as if the brain were a sacred space long abandoned. Another shows the heart, divided into chambers that resemble mazes. These weren't anatomical errors, they were symbols. Leonardo was channeling images from a place where language fails. Jung would have called it the collective unconscious. Cayce, the soul's memory. Leonardo may have simply felt it, so he hid them, disguised his visions as science when they were really prophecy. We called them engineering, but they were alchemy in disguise. Some say he predicted the future, but maybe he just saw the present so clearly that everything else revealed itself. In one of his lesser-known notes, he writes, "There are things that must be drawn but not seen, explained but not understood. These are the ones that matter most." History never quite knew what to do with a man like this, because he didn't belong to history. He was a timeless mirror of everything we avoid facing in ourselves. Have you felt it? That eerie sense that something inside you is speaking a language without words? He felt that too. The shadow of the visionary is to be a bridge between two worlds that can't recognize each other, and Leonardo was that bridge. But almost no, one crossed it. Some maps don't lead to places, they lead to states of being. Open one of Leonardo da Vinci's ancient notebooks and you might find the drawing of a heart. But look closely, really look, and it stops being just an organ. It becomes a temple, a mandala, an inverted mirror of the cosmos. That's what most missed in Da Vinci's anatomy. They weren't studies of biology. They were love letters to the unseen. When he dissected the skull, he wasn't just documenting tissue. He was suggesting that the human mind is a sanctuary of opposing forces, a sacred architecture where spirit and instinct collide in silent tension, and more. That parts of the brain didn't serve logic, but memory of the sacred. In one sketch, he draws the brain in dual form. On one side, physical structures, the folds and lobes. On the other, floating geometry, as if to say, the mind does not end at the brain. What science calls the hemispheres, Da Vinci may have seen as gates, one to the world, one to the soul, but his most haunting insights lie in the heart. To Leonardo, the heart wasn't a pump, it was a crossroad. Some of his cardiovascular drawings defy modern anatomical logic. He outlines non-existent canals, strange circulatory paths, Mysterious loops. Scholars call them errors. But what if they're not? What if they're spiritual meridians, like those in ancient Chinese medicine, or the sacred energy centers described in Vedic traditions? Centuries later, Edgar Cayce would speak of energy maps within the body, pathways that link the physical and spiritual, points of coherence between the fractured self and the whole. And in Leonardo's drawings, those rivers seemed to flow. It's as if something was guiding him, something that whispered, "Look deeper." And then, there's the Vitruvian Man. Much has been said about it. Human proportion, the golden ratio, symmetry. But what if it's something else? What if it's a code? The Vitruvian Man is not just about perfection. He is suspended between two shapes, a square and a circle, two archetypes. The square, earth, limitation, the temporal. The circle, heaven, infinity, the divine. The man is trapped in between, neither fully in heaven nor grounded on earth. Caught, divided, fragmented, as if Leonardo were saying, humanity has lost its spiritual alignment, and until it finds it, again, it will keep swinging between disconnection and longing. This image, so celebrated, may not be an homage to perfection at all. It may be a portrait of a fall. Da Vinci saw that we were drifting from our axis, and in his sketches he tried to draw us back. He had no dogma, only intuition, no sermon, only sketches. But deep inside he carried a truth he couldn't shake. His time no longer saw what he was trying to reveal. So he drew, like someone whispering in the middle of chaos, like someone drawing for the future. Have you ever felt that? That you carry a knowing you can't explain? That there's a secret map within your own body, and your soul is trying to lead you through it? Leonardo knew that feeling too. And through his lines, he tried to leave us a key. The body is a symbol, the mind, an echo, the heart, a portal. But only those who see with the soul will know how to enter. Some truths aren't hidden out of fear, they're concealed out of mercy. Leonardo da Vinci may have glimpsed something that the centuries would only begin to suspect, that humanity's true apocalypse wouldn't come with fire or war or flood, but with forgetting. A slow erasure of the soul until all that remains is function. And maybe that's why he concealed what he saw. Because if you read through his notebooks carefully, not just for inventions, but for patterns, you'll notice a haunting repetition. Again and again, the same theme returns: collapse, bridges breaking, buildings crumbling, gears jamming, bodies failing. This wasn't just curiosity or technical failure, it was symbolic. He was trying to warn us. Through the silent language of sketches, he was expressing what he sensed deep within, that humanity is caught in a loop. Every time we abandon soul in favor of speed, every time we forget meaning in the name of progress, we fall, again and again. Each prophecy in his machines was, in truth, a parable. Da Vinci seemed to understand that there's a blind momentum in humanity, a compulsion to recreate the same destruction, as if history weren't linear but spiraled, as if time didn't move forward, but folded back on itself. In one of his lesser-known notes he writes, "Time is not a river, it is a vortex. What sinks today will rise again in another form." This wasn't poetry, it was symbolic physics. To Da Vinci, time was a spiral of forgetting and remembering. When consciousness disconnects from the essential, everything becomes repetition. Civilizations rise, dazzle, build, and then collapse. Not because of enemies, but because of internal erosion, because every civilization crumbles when the soul is ignored. That's what his journals really contain, not just blueprints, but warnings, patterns, echoes of something ancient trying to be heard once more. He viewed progress as a paradox. The more technically advanced we become, the more we risk severing our inner connection. And that disconnect between what we are and what we build is the true catastrophe. There is no weapon more dangerous than intelligence without wisdom, no tragedy greater than invention without reverence. Leonardo saw the soul of humanity thinning, language turning into data, wonder being replaced by control. That's why he drew. Not to explain, to remember. We repeat the same mistakes because we refuse to look in the mirror. We project our wounds onto the world instead of healing them within. And the result is always the same: collapse, grief, and maybe, if we're lucky, rebirth. But even rebirth becomes illusion if it's not rooted in soul. Have you felt this? That strange déjà vu on a global scale, as if we're once again approaching a collapse we already know, as if the structures around us are trembling, not from chance, but from repetition. Leonardo tried to show us, and maybe, because he saw too much, he chose to hide, not out of fear, but out of compassion. Some truths aren't meant to be shouted. They're meant to be remembered. In silence. And if you're still here, listening, maybe you're beginning to remember too. Not every symbol was meant to be decoded. Some were meant to be remembered, exactly when the world was ready. Hidden. Among Leonardo da Vinci's countless sketches and musings are drawings that are rarely studied. Fragile bridges, unfinished wings, incomplete mechanisms. At first glance, they look like experiments abandoned in passing. But they're not. They're signals. Subtle traces left by someone who understood that the deepest truths often hide where no one looks. To Da Vinci, the sacred was never in the spectacle. It was in the fragment. Among these hidden images is a simple bridge, rope and wood, no grandeur, no complexity. But what stands out isn't the structure, it's the placement. The bridge connects two block-like shapes that resemble altars. As if the crossing isn't geographic, but metaphysical. This bridge is a metaphor. It doesn't span space, it spans awareness, a crossing between the fractured mind and the remembering soul. In another forgotten page, there are wings, not the rigid, mechanical kind that Leonardo is famous for. These are soft, more feather than metal. They lack gears, hinges, or levers. They're less machine and more offering. It's as if, by then, he realized, the true flight isn't of the body, it's of the spirit. And maybe he knew the future would miss that the world would chase flight through science and forget that transcendence was always internal. These drawings, these overlooked sketches, are full of grace. There's no ambition in them, no desire for praise, just a quiet invitation to look inward. He began hiding ancient techniques of reconnection in plain sight, proportions resembling mandalas, numbers that mirror Pythagorean codes, shapes that speak the language of sacred geometry. He was encoding memory in the very structure of his art. And the most extraordinary part, he never explained them. He just left them, as if trusting that someone, someday, would feel their pull. Today, we can look at them differently, not as failed designs, but as maps, inner blueprints, invisible architecture meant to guide us back to something forgotten. So now, try this. Close your eyes. Visualize a narrow bridge. It's not outside you, it's in your chest. One side holds your fragmented mind, the other, your intact soul. Begin to walk. Each step is a return, each breath a remembering. Feel the breeze. Listen to the silence beyond. It's you, before the forgetting. Maybe that's what Leonardo was really saying. Don't search outside for what only the soul can remember. What if the flight he imagined wasn't physical, but spiritual? What if he was showing us, quietly, patiently, that there's still a bridge, and that it's still waiting to be crossed? Not every end is destruction. Some are doorways. Dressed in silence, Leonardo da Vinci, in tracing the edges of the body, time, and soul, seemed to arrive at a truth that few dared to face. The end of humanity he sketched may not have been a literal collapse, but a metamorphosis, an end of who we thought we were, and the beginning of who we're meant to remember being. In his darkest drawings, there are floods, waters rising, cities engulfed, bodies submerged in spirals. At first glance, these seem like warnings of doom. But what if they're metaphors? What if those floods are memory? Ancient memory returning, not to destroy, but to cleanse, to wash away the noise, to quiet the scream of ego, to erode the hollow structures we've built over centuries of forgetting. Imagine the flood not as punishment, but purification. Sacred stillness, a reset, a calling back to the soul. Perhaps Leonardo foresaw that we'd arrive at this point, a world where everyone speaks, but no one listens, where all answers are accessible, but none of them satisfy, where our skies are filled with satellites, but empty of meaning. He saw collapse? Yes, but not as a final blow, as a threshold, a beginning. For those willing to see through the illusion, the metaphor of the end for Da Vinci was never about fire and rubble. It was about disconnection from each other, from nature, from the divine spark within, and maybe from ourselves. He seemed to understand that humanity would forget its source again and again until something forced us back into presence, into humility, into reverence. And maybe we're living that something now. Do you feel it? That strange fatigue that doesn't come from work, but from meaninglessness, that longing for silence, for depth, for something that can't be consumed, or posted or taught, that yearning to disappear, not to escape, but to remember who you were before all this. Perhaps the end Leonardo foresaw is now, and perhaps it's not to be feared, but embraced, because only in the crumbling of what's false can what's real begin to breathe again. Perhaps we're witnessing the death of a world that never truly belonged to us, and the birth of a humanity that remembers. Leonardo didn't want to prevent the end. He wanted us to see it differently, not as a tragedy, as a turning, a womb, a return. What if what we're living through right now is exactly what he tried to show us? What if we're not watching the end, but stepping into the beginning? And what if that beginning is sacred? Leonardo da Vinci was not merely a figure of the Renaissance. He was a threshold, a transmitter, a quiet sanctuary through which something older than time whispered truths that the world wasn't ready to hear. And if you're still here, perhaps some part of you was always listening. In the intuitive records of Edgar Cayce, there are accounts of souls born with very specific missions, carrying fragments of memory meant to reignite what humanity forgot. They don't come to impress. They come to remind, to preserve something ancient when the world turns numb. Leonardo was one of those souls, not a prophet in the traditional sense, but a translator of the invisible. He wasn't just drawing for kings or patrons. He was transcribing frequencies, receiving impressions from a place where language ends and essence begins. His journals were not inventions, they were transmissions, messages that bypass intellect and go straight to the soul. And those messages say this: the real end is not the fall of cities, not the decay of institutions. It's the splitting of consciousness, the moment we disconnect so deeply from our center that we begin to perform life instead of living it. Carl Jung spoke of this as the great modern tragedy, to live without ever knowing the soul, and the ancient essence knew, too, that only those who walk through the wilderness within can hear the voice that never left. Leonardo, somewhere between engineer and mystic, knew. He saw what would come and left us mirrors, not manuals, reflections of what we might become, or what we might still remember. His sketches were never meant to be solved. They were meant to be felt, to haunt the intuitive, to whisper through time. And the most unsettling realization? He wasn't sketching his world, he was sketching ours, because this moment, now, is the threshold he saw. We stand, as he once did, between soul and shadow, between noise and truth, between collapse and awakening, and we have a choice to repeat or to remember, to continue building without spirit, or to integrate, to look at the symbols of the past and finally understand they're not stories, they're medicine, they're memory, they're invitations. So now, listen. Beneath the data, the noise, the confusion, your soul knows. You carry a page of that forbidden journal inside your own chest, not written in ink, but in ache, in wonder. In that quiet longing you haven't been able to explain. You don't need to translate it. You need to feel it, to remember it. The journal isn't lost, it's within you. And now, before this video fades into silence, one final invocation. What if everything you've searched for, every question, every ache, every synchronicity, was never a sign of being lost, but a trail, a thread, the beginning of remembering? The journal is inside you, and if you could remember, what was your soul trying to tell you before the fall?